Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this Job Accommodation Network webcast titled Go To Accommodation Solutions. My name is Lisa. I will moderate today's training. I'm joined by my JAN colleague, Matthew, who will deliver this JAN training, and I appreciate you being here today. This Go-To Accommodation Solutions training will include a guided discussion on options that could be helpful when brainstorming accommodation ideas during that accommodation review and will include common go-to accommodation options shared with JAN users. It includes solutions for motor, cognitive, neurological, and sensory limitations. The training will be 60 minutes in duration. Matt, now I'll turn it over to you to get us started with the content.
Thanks, Lisa. For those of you that are new to Jan, welcome. We are a free consultation service that helps people understand job accommodations, Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and related workplace laws, the resources an individual with a disability can tap into to start a small business, and more. We have been around since 1983, so even longer than the ADA has been around at this point. We're just one office in Morgantown, West Virginia, but we provide our services to the entire United States and its territories. So if you ever have any questions, we're more than happy to help how we can. Also, JAN is a service of the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. Next slide, please. I will begin our training today by discussing forms of accommodation that are commonly helpful regardless of the individual's health condition or medical need. Following this, we will move into a discussion on more functional limitation-focused accommodations, which will be broken down into a section on cognitive and neurological needs, then motor and mobility needs, and finally sensory and immunology needs. Next slide, please. Without further ado, let's dig into our go-to accommodations. Let's start off with some generalized options to keep in mind for virtually any accommodation request. Think of these as your old and faithful toolbox, if you will. Next slide, please. Before we begin, I would just like to draw everyone's attention to the link at the bottom left of the slide that we have on screen. All of the slides that discuss accommodations in our presentation today will feature a linked resource that I thought would be helpful for you all to have handy. So please feel free to download the slides and review those at your leisure. Let's begin with an accommodation that many employers have likely implemented before, perhaps even without realizing it, and that would be job restructuring. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC for short, job restructuring includes modifications such as reallocating or redistributing marginal job functions that an employee is unable to perform because of the disability, and altering when or how a function is performed, regardless of if that function is considered essential or marginal to the job in question. An employee with a disability must be able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without an accommodation. But job restructuring can include reallocating marginal duties among workers. Thus, whether or not this is an accommodation to consider in a specific situation depends on what duties are considered essential. According to the EEOC, non-essential or marginal duties may need to be reallocated as an accommodation, but not essential job duties. Of course, employers may reallocate essential duties as an accommodation if they wish to do so. Sometimes this is done as a temporary accommodation. Next slide, please. Another go-to accommodation that can be implemented in a variety of ways is modifying a policy. Policy modifications are another modification you have likely allowed even if you did not think of it as an accommodation. Remember that an employer's internal policies can sometimes create barriers for people with disabilities. For example, a policy prohibiting food in specific areas may cause problems for individuals with diabetes, or a policy prohibiting drinks in specific areas may prevent someone with a panic disorder from being able to quickly take medication to help them during their panic attack. When an employer's internal policies are creating barriers like these for people with disabilities, allowing exceptions to those policies can be an accommodation to consider, absent undue hardship. It's important to keep in mind that this is about making an exception to the policy on the basis of the worker's disability-related needs. The employer is not altering the policy for everyone. This means that employers are free to maintain their policies and enforce them for everyone else who does not medically need such an exception as an accommodation. Next slide, please. Next, another go-to accommodation is telework. Telework can be very useful for a variety of medical needs. There can be some confusion when it comes to telework as an accommodation, though. According to the EEOC, an employer may need to modify its policy concerning where work is performed if such a change is needed as a reasonable accommodation, but only if this accommodation would be effective and would not cause an undue hardship. So, to help keep things aligned in your mind, think of telework as the employer changing the location where the individual performs their work. The employer controls where the individual needs to be for the work to be completed, so they can change that location as an accommodation if the job is compatible with telework. With this one simple change, several potential disability-related barriers can be addressed or even avoided entirely. For example, commuting issues are no longer a factor. Parking concerns are avoided. People with fragrance sensitivities no longer need to worry about someone coming in wearing strong perfumes. Workplace distractions are often removed, and so much more. Next slide, please. Now let's discuss some tips to help make processing telework requests easier. Firstly, remember that there is a difference between teleworking as a generalized benefit of employment and teleworking as an ADA accommodation. Telework is often considered a benefit of employment that is available to all or some employees within an organization. After receiving a request from an employee who wants to telework because of limitations related to their disability or health condition, an employer can first determine whether the request is covered under their current policy. Employees with disabilities should not be held to a higher standard or be required to jump through additional hoops to gain access to the same benefit or privilege available to employees without disabilities. When telework is not available as a benefit of employment, or if telework beyond what is generally available as a benefit of employment is being requested, then the request to work from home may be handled as a request for reasonable accommodation under the ADA. Our next tip is to make sure you assess how much of an employee's work realistically can be done remotely. When exploring telework, it may be necessary to identify and review the essential job functions. The essential functions are the tasks that are fundamental to performing a specific job. Essential job duties do not need to be removed to permit an employee with a disability to work from home as an accommodation. So consider how much physical on-site presence is truly necessary. For a job like a janitor, it may be difficult to find aspects of the work that can be done remotely. It's difficult to clean a site without being at the site, after all. But not every job requires physical on-site presence like this. So figuring out how much work is compatible with remote work will make it easier to assess whether telework is possible as an ADA accommodation. Evaluate each situation case by case to determine whether the employee can perform the essential duties at home, but remember that job restructuring allows us to reallocate marginal duties. So if someone needs to telework as an accommodation, but there are some aspects of their job that require working on site, we may want to look into whether or not any of those duties are marginal and whether they can be reallocated to others. Also note, according to the EEOC, employers may select any effective accommodation, even if it's not the one preferred by the employee. It is possible to offer alternative accommodations to telework, provided the alternative accommodations are effective. Next slide, please. Our next go-to accommodation is modifying a schedule. According to the EEOC, modifying a schedule may involve adjusting arrival or departure times, providing periodic rest breaks, altering when certain functions are performed, allowing an employee to use accrued paid leave, or providing additional unpaid leave. This type of accommodation boils down to letting workers work at times that are not typical for their position. Modified and flexible scheduling could be as simple as letting someone be a little late getting in at the start of their shift due to a sleeping disorder, or allowing additional breaks as an accommodation for someone with a gastrointestinal disorder. There can be potentially more complicated modifications as well, like allowing the worker to work part-time and gradually work their way back up to a full-time schedule after having a knee surgery or recovering from a chronic illness. Some jobs may be incompatible with certain schedule modifications, though. For example, a midnight shift security guard would need to be able to work the night shift since the job is designed for the work to be done during that specific shift. But there's often much more flexibility in scheduling than what we first might expect. Next slide, please. Leave is a very common accommodation. According to the EEOC, permitting the use of accrued paid leave or providing unpaid leave is a form of reasonable accommodation when necessitated by the employee's disability. When considering leave as an accommodation, it's important to keep in mind that employers are not required to provide additional paid leave beyond what an individual would what an employer would provide to all of its employees. But providing access to unpaid job protected leave may need to be considered as an accommodation absent undue hardship. There are several reasons why someone might need leave as an accommodation. Maybe the worker needs to attend physical therapy appointments because of their back impairment, or a worker with migraines might need leave to recuperate from that episodic manifestation of their disability. Other possible reasons could be to attend therapy appointments, to enable a wheelchair user to get their wheelchair repaired, to train a service animal, and much more. Keep in mind that ADA leave as an accommodation and leave provided under the Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, can often fulfill similar needs, but it's important to distinguish between when and how each type of leave can be used. For instance, FMLA leave can be used to meet medical needs of the worker's family members, whereas the ADA does not afford that benefit. Employers will want to be familiar with the differences like these to make sure that they keep all their options in mind that may be beneficial to the employee. Likewise, even if the worker has used up all of their FMLA leave allotment for the year, or they're not eligible for FMLA leave at all yet, they can still request a leave as an ADA accommodation if the reason is due to their own medical needs. Next slide, please. Reassignment as an accommodation can be a valuable tool to keep in mind, but we also don't want to jump immediately to this solution. If the individual explicitly states that they want a reassignment, then it's likely fine to consider that reassignment first. After all, the EEOC says that the requested accommodation should be given primary consideration. But if the individual does not want a reassignment, then it's best to think of reassignment as an accommodation of last resort. This means we keep it in mind, but we explore other options that may allow the worker to stay in their current job first. But let's say that there's no way to accommodate to keep the individual in their current role. What can the employer keep in mind when considering reassignment? Well, one important thing to keep in mind is that the individual should not be required to compete for a new position like they would under a normal job transfer process. According to the EEOC, reassigning an employee with a disability as an accommodation means that the employee gets the vacant position if they're qualified for it. Next, the question of pay often comes up. Remember that you want to start by looking at equivalent positions in terms of pay, status, and other relevant factors. If an equivalent position is vacant and would be a good fit for the individual's disability-related needs, then if the employee is qualified for that position, you could reassign them into that role. However, if no such equivalent position is available, then an employee can be reassigned to a lower level position as an accommodation. Next slide, please. Okay, that concludes our section on generalized accommodations. Now let's move on to a discussion of common accommodations for cognitive and neurological needs. Next slide, please. It is common for people who have learning disabilities to need changes in how training is delivered or in how pre-employment testing is performed. What these changes look like will depend on the specific case. For example, someone with auditory processing disorder might need materials to be provided in other formats, like providing a physical printout instead of being told the information orally. Similarly, an individual with dyslexia might need additional time to take a test that requires a lot of reading, or they may need to be provided with a reader to read the test to them as they take it. Finally, keep in mind that the employment testing we implement may not be relevant to every job the business has. Employers love to follow their consistent processes, but remember, if there is no real business need to assess a worker's ability to do something because it's not related to their job, then the employer could simply allow an exception to that testing policy. Forgoing the testing or testing skills in a different way can be forms of reasonable accommodation. Next slide, please. People with conditions like ADHD or conditions that impact executive functioning can benefit from adjusting how instructions or important details are given to them. This could be as simple as providing a quick summary of what was discussed orally in a meeting, or providing a checklist or a flow chart so that they can visualize a complex series of steps more easily. Color coding important details and critical tasks can also be helpful for people with memory issues so that they are less likely to forget to do something vital. Finally, establishing a priority system of tasks that need to be accomplished can help add structure to the workload so that's easier at a glance for people with anxiety disorders to know what needs to be tended to first so they don't feel overwhelmed. Next slide, please. Next, service animals can support people with all kinds of disability-related needs. This could be by providing mobility assistance by helping a person maintain their balance while they walk, or helping them pick up items off the floor. It could be by serving as a guide dog for people with vision impairments so that they are able to navigate the world while avoiding obstacles more easily. Hearing dogs are trained to recognize and alert the handler to important sounds like doorbells, alarm clocks, or smoke detectors. Medical alert dogs are trained to identify and alert their handler to when their medical needs arise. This is a very helpful service for people with epilepsy, for instance, as the dog can alert the individual that a seizure is about to happen so the individual can move to a safer location before it starts in earnest. Medical alert dogs can be helpful for people for people with diabetes too, as the dog can alert them to when they have a sudden change in their blood pressure level so they can attend to that medical need more quickly. Another common situation we get questions about service animals here at Jan is relating to service animals for mental health needs. Keep in mind that this may be different from a request for access for a emotional support animal, though. Service animals are trained to perform specific tasks to help mitigate someone's disability-related needs. Simply because an animal is needed due to a mental health reason does not automatically mean that it's not a request for a service animal. Have a full conversation with the employee to understand their specific needs. Next slide, please. Now that we understand what a service animal can do for people with disabilities, let's go over some practical tips to help an employer process an accommodation request to bring a service animal on site. First and foremost, remember that if the business has a no animal policy in place, we might need to consider an exception to that policy as part of the accommodation. Keep in mind that this does not mean we need to allow the service animal to access every area of the worksite. After all, laws outside of the ADA might prohibit animals being in specific areas, so we will want to keep situations like that in mind. But for areas that do not have barriers like that, allowing exceptions for a service animal can make sense when the worker needs to access them to do their job. When evaluating if the service animal will be a good accommodation to implement, an employer will generally want to confirm that the animal is able to provide the service that the individual requires because of their disability. So, how does the animal help the individual? What service does it offer? And is it trained to do that task effectively? And aside from that, the employer would also want to confirm that the animal is not somehow disruptive to the workplace. This can mean things like prohibiting the animal from barking excessively or acting aggressive towards others in the workplace. Keep in mind that it's becoming increasingly common for individuals to train their own service animals. In situations like that, the individual may not have documentation regarding the animal's training. In that situation, asking the individual to explain and demonstrate the animal's ability to perform the necessary tasks can be beneficial. Finally, considering trial periods can be very helpful in these situations. Sometimes we simply do not know an accommodation is going to work unless we try it and see. So, establishing a temporary period where the accommodation will be implemented so its effectiveness can be tested and monitored can give us information to use when revisiting the accommodation to see if it can be implemented long term. Next slide, please. Job coaches work to help an employee become self-sufficient so that they can perform a job on their own. In essence, they provide individualized training and create a plan to help their client learn specific skills that they need to do a job independently. People with cognitive disabilities like Down syndrome, for instance, may need a specialized approach to training than what typical job training processes may provide. In a situation like that, a job coach can help bridge the gap and enable the worker to be successful in the role. Coworker mentors are similar to job coaches, but they focus less on helping the worker learn a specific skill set, but instead focus on helping the worker be successful in their career as a whole. For instance, a mentor may help the individual with a disability understand the company's requirements for maintaining certifications and getting continuing education. Or they may model behaviors that align with the company's culture and values that the individual with the disability can adopt to make working with coworkers and management easier. Next slide, please. People with various health conditions, for example, social anxiety, may find it helpful to have a support person attend important meetings. Sometimes just having someone else in the room can help alleviate a feeling of the individual is being ganged up on, even when those on the other side of the table are not trying to be intimidating or confrontational at all. But they can do more than this if needed. They can help the individual remember important points that they want to be sure they address, and they can take notes to help the individual remember what was said on those important points. Also, if the conversation gets derailed, the support person can speak up and help to gently move the conversation back to the topics at hand. Next slide, please. Plans of action are not uncommon in the workplace, but employers sometimes don't realize that this can be an accommodation too. Like an employer implementing an emergency plan or having fire drills, disability plans of action are accommodation preparedness tools. But disability plans of action are customized to help the employer know how to proceed when they need to respond to a potential medical emergency because of the worker's disability. This could involve working with the individual and their medical provider on establishing what to do if an individual has a seizure at work, or if the individual loses consciousness at work. An immediate impulse in that situation may be to call 911 for help. But if the individual doesn't need emergency assistance, then a plan of action can help ensure that the employer, can tell whether that assistance is medically necessary for the worker. Next slide, please. Okay, that concludes our section on cognitive and neurological accommodations. Now let's move on to a discussion of common accommodations for motor and mobility needs. Next slide, please. To begin our dive into the motor and mobility accommodation world, let's start with something we all probably are familiar with, ergonomics. For those unfamiliar, ergonomics is basically tailoring the tools the individual will be using to complete their work to their unique bodily needs. So, this can be changes to the chairs they use at their workstation, or changes to the computer keyboard, mouse, and monitor placement, and so much more. Ergonomics involves a lot of different things, and plenty of items are marketed nowadays as ergonomic. But since everyone's bodies are a little bit different, sometimes something that's marketed as ergonomic might not be so for the specific worker in question. This can become especially apparent for workers with disabilities. Because of this, having an ergonomic assessment done on the worker and how they use their workstation can be very helpful in identifying areas where changes may be needed. An ergonomic assessment provider can also offer suggestions on different equipment to utilize that may be a better fit for the individual's specific needs as well. Next slide, please. People with various fine motor impairments, like those with carpal tunnel syndrome, for example, can benefit from accommodations that involve using a computer in an alternate way. A common way to achieve this is by utilizing a speech-to-text dictation software so that the worker can speak the words instead of manually typing them. But dictation software may not be the best solution in every situation. Sometimes we need to look into alternative keyboards and mice instead. The good news is that there are multiple different types out there. For keyboards, there are one-handed keyboards that are designed with a totally different key layout to be used efficiently with only one hand. For those that prefer the normal key layout, though, there are also miniature keyboards you can look into. For mice, there are options like vertical mice that can be used similarly to traditional mice, but you hold them by using a different wrist posture. For more specialized options, there are on-screen keyboards or alternative input devices that essentially allow the people to use devices that do the same thing as a mouse that are controlled by using foot pedals, for instance. Next slide, please. People with back, shoulder, and knee limitations can have difficulty with tasks that require a lot of reaching and bending. In general, how you accommodate these needs would be by either raising or lowering the worker to be closer to the object, or by raising or lowering the object to be closer to the worker. To raise or lower the worker, this can involve utilizing assistive devices like work platforms, low task chairs, or mechanic creepers. To raise or lower the object, this can involve devices like lift tables, reaching or grabbing tools, or even more industrial options like forklifts and cranes. Next slide, please. Parking is a difficult topic under Title 1 of the ADA. On one hand, employers need to provide accommodations to enable employees to have equal access to the benefits of employment, and for many employers, parking would likely be considered a benefit of employment. But on the other hand, the EEOC has no formal stance on parking related accommodations, so figuring out how to proceed in these situations can be tricky. Because of that, we here at JAN suggest a practical approach and trying to make parking accommodated requests as easy as possible to make and consider. Next slide, please. We can offer some practical tips here. First, it's helpful to know what parking areas the employer has control over. If the employer controls the lot, then it may be significantly easier to make changes to that lot, such as designating a space for use as part of an accommodation. If the employer does not control the lot, then the employer can still try to talk with the property owner about the modifications the accommodation requires and see if the owner would consent to those changes being made. For instance, we may need to repaint some spots or install signs to those set aside for use to as an accommodation so people can tell which ones they're not allowed to park in if they don't have an accommodation. Second, it is helpful to know which parking areas the individual is permitted to park in. For instance, if a lot is set aside for use by customers only, then an employee may not have to be given access to park in that area, even as an accommodation. Likewise, if a lot is for managers only, non-managers may not have to be given access to that lot. But if the lot is one the individual can park in, then we can try to figure out a way to accommodate them with a closer parking space in that lot. One way we can do that would be to reserve a parking space for use as an accommodation. This could mean converting some spots that are close enough to the building for the individual's needs and ensuring that space is available for them to park in consistently. Next slide, please. Not every job involves working in an office space. So how do we accommodate people who work off-site or out in the field? In general, this can be achieved with some specialized pieces of equipment. If the individual has trouble with balancing or walking, mobility aids like canes, walkers, or wheelchairs can be helpful. Similarly, if the terrain is really rugged, options like all-terrain scooters or ATVs might be helpful. Fall protection gear may be helpful when needed if you do a lot of climbing, like for workers climbing power cable poles. Also consider options to make it easy for the worker to call for help if they need it. Walkie-talkies are one solution, but there are also dedicated alerting devices that just involve pressing a button and a call for help is made automatically. Next slide, please. People with hand and wrist injuries, as well as people with Parkinson's disease or essential trimmers, can all have difficulty with duties that require a lot of gripping and grasping. The two main ways to accommodate these needs is to provide options to make the gripping and grasping easier to do, or eliminate the need to grip or grasp entirely. For example, steering wheel grips and anti-vibration gloves can make it much easier to grasp the steering wheel on a riding lawnmower. The vibrations from this type of equipment can really cause hand and wrist pain to flare up fast. Tool balancers can help a worker hold on to a power tool, making it much easier for them to use them. Items like gooseneck phone holders and headsets eliminate the need to grasp a phone receiver. There is a reason why headsets have become so popular after all. Next slide, please. Some jobs require traveling, and as you can imagine, traveling can bring to light many disability related needs that may not otherwise be on an employer's radar. If we're providing rental vehicles for the worker to use, we might need to change the vehicle to be more accessible to them. For instance, people with back impairments and hip impairments may have difficulty stooping down and getting out of low vehicles. For air travel, people with lower back limitations might find it difficult to sit in economy class seats for hours without it causing them a lot of pain. Similarly, people with obesity might find it challenging to fit into one of those small seats. Reserving a seat in the emergency exit row as an accommodation can give the traveler a little extra leg room if that's needed. Or purchasing two side by side seats or upgrading the worker to business class is a solution to consider as well. People with lifting and carrying limitations can have a difficult time dealing with their luggage when they board the plane. It may be easier to simply allow them to check their bags and cover the extra cost as an accommodation to avoid that barrier entirely. Next slide, please. That concludes our section on motor and mobility accommodations. Now let's move on to a discussion of common accommodations for sensory and immunological needs. Next slide, please. Screen magnification is a very common accommodation need for people with progressive vision loss and those with low vision. Sometimes this can be achieved with options the computer already has built in. Many operating systems allow the user to adjust the size of the mousing pointer on the screen, as well as the size of text and icons. But sometimes adjusting these features is simply not enough. In those cases, a larger monitor with a different resolution might be helpful, but sometimes an alternative form of magnification might be necessary. This could be achieved through external magnifiers that can be clipped onto the side of the computer monitor. However, that might not be ideal since the magnification would only be for part of the screen. Software-based screen magnification, a popular example of which would be Zoom Text, allows the user to move a magnification area around the screen on demand with their mouse, so they can have the magnification wherever it is needed. Next slide, please. For some people, magnification alone may not address their disability-related needs. For others, no amount of magnification is going to help. In those situations, it may be helpful to consider screen reading software as an accommodation. A popular example of screen reading software would be JAWS. These programs will read aloud text and other items on the screen for the user. Individuals who are blind may find software like this very helpful. Keep in mind that there may be some compatibility issues with software like this. If you encounter that, specialized scripting might be needed to bridge the gap and make the screen reader work well with the program that the worker is using. Next slide, please. For people who have hearing limitations, being able to participate in a meeting can be difficult. Captioning services can help bridge this gap by letting the user read what is being said instead of listening to get the same information. Captioning can be provided in person or remotely by a person or via apps and AI assistants who transcribe what they hear. Automated options can be useful and can serve well in smaller meetings, but for larger meetings with many people talking at once, they may not be a great fit. Next slide, please. Sign language interpreting is a classic accommodation option. It can be difficult to find an alternative option that matches the level of effectiveness and ease of use for people who primarily use sign language. Because of those reasons, some people who use sign language have a strong preference for this accommodation over alternative options. If an employer needs to provide an interpreter as an accommodation, but does not know how to find one, the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf is a resource to help with this. Keep in mind that while it is traditional for sign language interpreting to be provided face-to-face, video remote interpreting is also an option. Video remote interpreting can help expand access to more interpreter options, including quick access to an interpreter with little advance notice. Next slide, please. Assistive listening devices can help people who are hard of hearing, who use hearing aids, or use cochlear implants by boosting the voice volume of someone who they are speaking with, or by helping to filter out background noises. This can help with face-to-face communication as well as with conversations that happen over the phone. The assisted listening device will transmit the sound to a receiver worn by the individual. The receiver can be the individual's own hearing aid or implant, or it can be a headset or an earbud. These devices typically work by transmitting the sound via Bluetooth, but radio wave, infrared light, and induction loop systems are also used. Next slide, please. One common barrier for people who use hearing aids is when it comes to telephone access on the job. Because of how each hearing aid features are so different from others, it's often best to consult with the individual's audiologist to be sure the options being considered are compatible with the hearing aid and the phone being used. For example, some hearing aids are Bluetooth compatible, and for those options, a Bluetooth streaming device can be used to link the phone and the hearing aid directly together. But if the hearing aid lacks Bluetooth compatibility, then a headset that is compatible with the hearing aid and the phone may be a good fit so that the headset connects and streams the voice over the phone to the hearing aid. Next slide, please. Next, let's consider accommodations related to allergies. When it comes to reviewing accommodations for allergies, we suggest a three-step process to make finding an effective solution easier. First, if we can remove the allergen from the environment, let's start there. This could be as simple as changing the cleaning products used in the office or removing air fresheners. If allergens cannot be removed, then next look to see if the individual can be removed from the area where the irritant is located. This might be accomplished by moving their workstation to another part of the building, by creating latex-free zones in a hospital, or even by allowing the individual to work from home. Finally, if we cannot remove the allergen or remove the individual from the area with the allergen, then review options to reduce that exposure as much as possible. This can include options like using air purifiers, masks, adjusting the employee's schedule to allow for more frequent breaks away from the area, or change their schedule entirely if the allergen is coming from a coworker, so they're not in the same place at the same time. Next slide, please. Next, using a mask as an accommodation can reduce potential exposures to irritants and pathogens. However, they're not a one-size-fits-all solution that will be best in every situation. Sometimes other accommodation options will need to be explored. For example, sometimes a person cannot wear a mask at all because of a medical need. After all, a person who is required to wear a mask made of materials they are allergic to is probably not going to be an effective accommodation. In situations like that, it may be necessary to search for masks made from different materials, or if that's just not possible, consider allowing the individual to not wear a mask as a policy modification, provided it is safe to do so. Next slide, please. That concludes our discussion on go-to accommodation options today. I covered many accommodation solutions, but if you still need some help because none of these options seem like they'll hit the mark, you might want to review our A to Z lists at askjan.org. We have pages on there with possible accommodation ideas that are listed by disability, by limitation, by work-related function, by topic, and by accommodation. The A to Z is a helpful Jan resource to review if you're stumped with what accommodation to provide for a request. Next slide, please. Also, the newest feature of the askjan.org site is the Situation and Solutions Finder, which provides free access to accommodation scenarios shared by Jan users that employers and workers with disabilities can explore. The scenarios come from a wide range of organizations, both large and small, spanning various industries in the private and public sectors. The feature allows users to filter results by disability, limitation, and/or occupation, and you can copy and save the results that you get as a PDF too. While Jan's Situation and Solution Finder is not a comprehensive resource, it can be very helpful to just get a feel for what accommodations others have found to be successful for a given disability-related need or in a given industry or occupation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Matt. That is going to be all the time we have today. We appreciate you and your experience. We definitely learned a lot about all types of accommodation solutions. We hope this training was informative to everyone joining us, and we thank you for attending. Just a reminder, all Jan webcasts are recorded and made available in the Jan Webcast Series library. A link to the recording of this event is going to be shared with all registrants via email about 1 week after that live event. The next Jan webcast will be announced soon, so please visit askjan.org and the Jan training page for more information. And to access a variety of readily available Jan training resources, visit that training resource page. Attendees, if you have questions about workplace accommodations, remember, you can ask Jan. We can help. Contact the Jan service directly for free and confidential consultation. Use the askjan.org website and live chat, and you can call Jan at 1-800-526-7234, or you can email us at jan@askjan.org. If you care to follow, you can find the Job Accommodation Network. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And then on X, we're @Jan. Thank you for joining us today for this Jan webcast, and that concludes this training. Thank you.